Yo, what's up everybody? A quick disclaimer before we get into this video. I just want to let you guys know that really right now I think Marvel Snap is in a reasonable state of balance. And I don't think that it's always the right course of action to nerf or even sometimes buff cards. There's other ways that the game can make the game balanced, right? The developers can change things such as matchmaking or actually adding new cards, right? You add new cards, it provides new synergies for other cards, or maybe counters some of the really popular strong cards in the meta at the time. So there's just other ways that we can approach it. But this time of the month, right at the end of a season, with the new season, there's usually a balance patch. So I like to just make this video to talk about some potential buffs, nerfs, and reworks that we could possibly see, because I think that Team Second Dinner is actually going to make a balance change every month, even if it's in a balanced state, because it mixes the game up, it refreshes it up. Because if the best decks are like 1, 2, 3, like 3 options, right, it's going to get repetitive. Even if maybe it's a triangle and they counter each other and it makes a balanced state, it's like, oh, okay, well, that's not all that fun after about 4 weeks of the same kind of decks on the ladder. Not everyone's going to bring that really spicy creative deck to ranked, right? So because they want to win those cubes. So when you make the balance changes, maybe it does murder a card here or there, but at least it maybe opens up space for other cards, you know? So I'm not looking to really murder any cards. I don't think any need to be necessarily murdered. These are my nerfs, okay? Now, I want to get this right out of the way. You're probably looking at Aero and thinking, okay, whatever. But then you're probably looking at Red Skull and you're probably pissed because you don't want Red Skull to be nerfed, and you're probably screaming at your monitor that Red Skull isn't the problem, Shuri is. And I would agree with you to a point. But here's the thing about these two cards and the two proposed nerfs that I have here. They were actually in this balanced state for several months. It wasn't until about October or November, I believe, that they got buffed because they weren't seeing enough play. But since that buff, the game has changed. For one, Aero became a lot more popular in a lot of decks. So everyone's just throwing in Aero because they realized it's a really good card. Okay, so since then, we had to drop her 1 power. You know, she was 8. And then she went to 7. I think we just bring her back to 6. Bring her back to the way she was in beta and just see if she can still hold her own and be a top-end card. I think the ability is what makes her strong, but you know what? The power actually really does matter in some scenarios. So I feel like if we just, keep nudging her down, I feel like eventually we'll find a happy place for Aero, because she really is one of the best cards in the game right now. And I do think that if they were going to nerf a card, it would end up being her. And I don't think they changed the ability. And I hope that they don't change her cost in some fashion. So I really hope it's just 1 more power, okay? Red Skull. So Red Skull, the reason I think that we should nudge him back to 14 power is because when he was 14 power, he didn't have a lot of support. There was just 0 to remove his negative ability, and that was like the only way to really like get value out of Red Skull. And at the time, really popular decks were like these zoo decks running like Blue Marvel and a bunch of 1-drops and that kind of thing, and spreading across the board. We already have that a little bit right now with Thanos decks and the stones. So with Red Skull, he got more support later on. Look at Shuri, right? Shuri came out and made Red Skull amazing. It didn't even matter that his ability would give +2 power to other people. It didn't matter because you had 30, 60, maybe even power in some scenarios if you can double Shuri's output. So it's just absolutely bonkers what you can do with Red Skull for only 5. Right? Mind you, 5. So, and then also the other thing to think about is Sauron, right? So there's more to the 0 package of like removing negative ongoing abilities. Not everybody has Sauron, not everybody has Shuri, but Red Skull has one of the highest win rates and it's popping up in a lot of decks. So I feel like more people are just going to end up with Shuri and Sauron in time. It's going to keep dropping in series and eventually it'll be much more available to the public. And once even more people have it, those numbers I think are just actually going to either stay the same at these high win rates or maybe even inflate because more people will have access and start playing it. Maybe more counters pop up. It's hard to predict the future in that sense, but I do think that 1 power wouldn't really hurt the guy all that much. It hurts the combination a little bit, right? Because Shuri doubles Red Skull, so that's essentially 2 points of power being deducted. It becomes a 28 power card, and then it's still giving that +2, which ends up being 8, so you got like net 20 power for this combination. 9 energy, 20 power. I feel like that's pretty fair. Your opponent also has to fill that location. Like, I feel like this is going to be still okay. Like, these are small nudges, small nerfs. And this also indirectly hurts like Taskmaster, because that's a crazy combination as well. There's just a few other cards that this kind of like affects slightly. It affects that whole kind of archetype slightly, but not too much that I think it wouldn't be viable. Now we have to talk about Shuri, because this one I really don't know what to do, and I just put this here. Maybe we can start some conversation on how we'd nerf Shuri, because let's face it, she's probably the best card. Between her and Aero seem to be the top two, and maybe Thanos is a third contender. And don't worry, we'll talk about him soon. But with Shuri, you know, I didn't want to change her ability. It's fun, you know, it works with the Wakanda warriors and stuff like that. It's all good. And then making her 5 cost, like it might end up being the route that they take. But my goodness, I feel like that destroys this card, because if you can't play anything after the card you doubled, then you're just like not in a good spot, and even more telegraph Shang-Chi's, because your opponent's going to know for sure that's where you want to play that big card. Yeah, I don't know. I don't want them to make it a 5 cost. I don't want them to make it like a leader thing where that she can only affect certain sides if you played the card on the right or the left. I don't know. That could be a thing. I don't want them to change the energy cost. Maybe it ends up being a thing where we add restrictions, right? You can only play Shuri before X turn. Maybe the card, in order to get it doubled, it has to be played to the right of Shuri or to the left of Shuri. Like that could be some flexible options that we could do with this card. But overall, I kind of like the ability. It's neat. It creates some fun moments, and it's counterable with Shang-Chi, Cosmo, all that kind of stuff. But overall, the card's just performing way too well and it needs to be changed. So I just put it down to 1 power, because I was thinking, why don't we just put it down 1 power, see what happens, right? Then we can look at changing the ability later. They did the same thing for leader basically, and it kind of worked, but it also killed leader. So I don't know. These are difficult decisions. The Shuri one I'm not too sure about. I just wanted to talk about her, but these two I feel like could go back to their original selves and we'd be in a fairly more balanced state. But there's still one other card we have to talk about. Well, let's talk about some buffs. Let's talk about those buffs. We got to buff some cards here. All right, so I am super down for buffing cards that don't see a lot of play. It'd be really nice because, you know, in Marvel Snap, when you only have so many tokens or whatever, and you're in Series 3, you can only get so many cards. It'd be nice to get the ones that are actually viable and playable, right? So that you try to make sure that they're all kind of playable in their own regard, and some of them just quite aren't. Some of them find themselves in a certain deck, but otherwise are absolute trash. And then, you know, there's a lot that I feel like with future support will be okay. You know, I thought Black Bolt maybe would get a little bit better with stature. That still is yet to be determined because stature is impossible to get right now for a lot of people, but we'll see. Okay, these cards here I feel like are just overall really underwhelming. Elektra, right? Elektra is absolutely shadowed by Killmonger, and it's sad because Elektra is a cool character. So I feel like she doesn't need to be a 1/1. You know, she's already not really doing her effect the way you want her to, and the value doesn't always end up being there. Maybe your opponent doesn't even play a 1-drop. If she can snipe a Sunspot, that'd be great. And maybe it'd be great if she ends up being the tech over Killmonger, because she can carry herself with 2 power, right? You know, that normal 1-cost stat line, and she snipes a Sunspot, and now it's like 1/5 value or plus or whatever else, right? So I feel like just giving her a little bit of nudge and power makes her a little bit more decent. Maybe you start throwing her in Lockjaw decks or something to cycle her around and get a couple Electro throws. I don't know. I just like to see this card back in the meta because Killmonger's a little bit too prevalent. Maybe what you do is you nerf Killmonger so that the Electro becomes the cheap and more viable option. So that gets thrown into more decks. I don't know. Maybe that's the course of action, but let's just talk about buffing her. Give her another power, right? And mind you, with these buffs and nerfs, I'm only changing the power and the energy. When we talk about reworks, I'm changing the ability, okay? So then we also got Yellow Jacket. Yellow Jacket, you know, like, I don't know. He's just so trash. Like, you can use him in those Lockjaw decks, and that's okay. It's a 0-cost card. You cycle. But even then, I hate giving the negative power to my Lockjaw and maybe another card. It feels bad. Maybe he comes out of the Lockjaw cycle, and that's the worst feeling ever. And that's, like, really one of his only viable places right now. He's just so bad compared to like Wasp or just, you know, anything else really. Even the 1-drops are better off running, even though he costs 0. Getting him out from like Jane Foster, maybe. I don't know. I don't even know about that. So yeah, I just feel like Yellow Jack is so bad. I think he could be 3 cost, because then, okay, yeah, turn 1, you can, or at an empty location, right? You can play him 0/3. That's great. That's great. But then you got to play him at an empty location, and like maybe it's just not possible. Maybe it ends up being like a late game thing. Maybe when Hitmonkey comes out and you play all these cards, maybe that'd be a cool thing to do. Because otherwise, if you play him with one other card here, it's a 0-2. If you play him with two other cards here, it's a 0-1. You know what I'm saying? So like, I feel like it's fine for him to be 3 power, and I don't think it would change his viability all that much. But maybe future support, like that Hitmonkey style, we might end up seeing some cool stuff. And for context, Hitmonkey is a card that when you play him on reveal, he gets +2 power for each other card you play that turn. So a lot of cheap cards mixed with him, it's cash money. And then lastly, I have Orca here because Orca's just super disappointing. It's one of the newer Series 4 cards that was delayed release, and it just doesn't do what you want it to. Make it a 6/10 so that it becomes a 6/15 and compete with Destroyer. Destroyer, yeah, he destroys your entire board. Okay, that seems bad, but it's not, because maybe you have Bucky Barnes, you have Nova, you protected things, and then it's fine. It works. It's just always better to run Destroyer, because even if with the ongoing tag, maybe you want to like buff it with, I don't know, Spectrum or something. I don't know. It's just difficult to get him more power. Orca's just the big whale chilling on his own, not carrying his weight. 614, that's just not enough. And you don't want to spend your last turn hoping your opponent doesn't goblin you, put a rock there, a squirrel ends up there from Central Park, and this is a dead draw. Like, there's so much that can go wrong with this whale that I feel like he needs some kind of buff. Or straight up, man, I thought about just dropping him to 5. What if he was a 5/8 with +5 power? He's just like a slightly bigger Namor. Like, would he still get play? Probably not. I honestly don't think he would. He needs something. So let's just give him a slight nudge in power and see if maybe he can find a home. But anyways, those are just some buffs. There's a lot of other cards, guys, that I have talked about in past balance predictions, patch predictions that haven't been changed yet. I still stand by a lot of those changes. So if you want to see them, you can go back and check those out because they just get repetitive if I kept putting them here. But I also have some reworks. Let's check it out. All right, lastly, some reworks. Okay, so I'm just going to start with Dazzler, actually. So Dazzler is just her original data mine version, right? Okay, so she, for some reason, before release, was changed to only give +6 power if you have your entire board filled. But it used to be 8 power. I say bring it back to 8 power. I've never even seen Dazzler. Maybe that's a thing. You know, I haven't even seen the card. Maybe she's actually pretty good. But from what I've gathered, people who actually own her, she's kind of underwhelming, inconsistent, hard to actually, get your board filled to get that value. And then she's just a 4/4. I feel like if we just make the quest a little bit more of a payoff, then it's just to win more. And that's kind of great. That's kind of her character, is just to complete that quest and you get a big payoff. That's great. That makes sense to me. You give her a little more base power, but I don't know. I feel that reminds me of like the Drax thing. They gave Drax +1 power, but they took away from his ability. And now he's just like in a weird spot. I feel like you just give her +2 power. Maybe she'll be okay. Maybe she'll be a little bit more interesting to pick up for 3K tokens or whatever she costs right now, right? It's not cheap for a card that's just kind of not good at all, or doesn't really fit in a lot of decks. So there's like the Ultron thing. I'm sure it's out there, but I haven't seen it. So I'd like to see her get a little bit of a buff, or just go back to what she used to be, right? And lastly, Thanos. So I don't think Thanos is the problem. In fact, they give him 11 power, which kind of did end up being a bit of a nerf, because he can get Shang-Chi'd at any time. So if you cheat him out, it's a bit of a risk. You can't just play the stones on turn 6 and then boom, he gets 21 power or whatever. It's like, oh shoot, he's always at 11. That's really all you ever get him to. Completing the quest is difficult enough. That's not a concern. The concern and the power spike from that card is the Infinity Stones. They are all really, really good. Honestly, a lot of them could use some changes, but I think that these two are the biggest culprits in my experience in playing a lot of Thanos lately. The Space Stone is just so much, flexibility. You can move a lot of your cards, and it's a big culprit with the Lockjaw cycle. So you can play Lockjaw, you can play the Space Stone, and then you can move Lockjaw, and the Space Stone became like Infinite or something. You can move the Infinite, you get 20 power elsewhere, like an Infinite that can move, and it was cheated out early. That's cracked. Okay. What another one is that you move the Lockjaw and you keep cycling, and that's what you want to do in that deck anyways. So it's just a bit of a problem stone. And then there's locations that you can't reach, like Sanctum Sanctorum, and all of a sudden the Thanos deck can do that. Like, that's wild. So let's leave that. Let's let them have a little bit of reach, but why don't we just make it so the Space Stone is the only thing that can move? Then it still gets some buffs with some of the locations. I know that's a pretty heavy-handed nerf. I'll admit that. But these stones are pretty cracked. And if you can still move the Space Stone off, then it still opens another spot to Lockjaw cycle. So it's not the worst thing in the world for that cycling deck. So I feel like that'd be okay. So only the Space Stone can move. It can move once. So it ends up being kind of like a Nightcrawler. And honestly, a lot of the stones are just kind of like other cards, but better value. It's odd. Okay, so then we have the Time Stone, another really strong card. Another one I almost put was the Soul Stone. I just wasn't sure how to change that one exactly. Maybe like an on reveal. But anyways, the Time Stone, on reveal, draw a card. Next turn, you get +1 energy. What if we made it so that both players got +1 energy, right? So you give a little bit to your opponent, but you still have the information of getting the bonus energy, and you get to use it how you want in the following turn, whereas maybe your opponent didn't plan for that, and it doesn't do anything for them. But maybe, because this is a bit of a nerf, it gives your opponent the opportunity to ramp into something, and that's cool too. So I just feel like it's too easy with Time Stone to, right now, actually a really good deck is Galactus and Thanos. You can ramp with Time Stone into your Galactus. But just all kinds of other things, ramping on turn 1 into that Lockjaw to get the cycle going. It's just crazy. Just drawing a card, getting bonus energy, and a 1/1 that can synergize with other things, it's a little bit too much. So I feel like giving energy to your opponent neutralizes it a little bit. Okay, so that's really all I do right now with Thanos. I feel like we need to kind of wait and see or make some small changes to these cards. It's actually probably one of the easier cards to balance because it has so many pain points that we can try out and see what works and change this, change that. They should probably just stop changing Thanos because he's totally fine himself. It's the stones. Anyways, there we go. Those are some of my proposed changes, or some of the changes that I think that might come to Snap, or some of the cards that are going to be focused on. We're going to see. This Monday is when the new season's going to roll out. Days of Future Past, which looks really exciting with Nimrod. I'm going to be streaming them. I cannot wait. So anyways, thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you would nerf, what you would buff, if you like these, if you don't. I totally understand. Again, I don't really think we need to change the balance that much in this game, but it's fun to talk about these things, right? So thank you so much for watching, guys, and I will catch you guys next time.